16. We went, we three, to seek the secrets of the haunted place, to pierce its mystery. We had learned of it in a mad woman's dream diary, which she had kept while confined at Arkham Sanitarium. Sonia Orne was a poetess and a biographer of unlucky versifiers, and we had been enthralled by her imaginative recollections of Justin Geoffrey and Edward Pickman Darby. She was of ancient Arkham heritage, her great ancestor none other than Jeremiah Orne, who imparted the books and funds that led to the establishment of Miskatonic University. It was Samuel among us who had been intensely drawn to her history, being a poet of peculiar cast himself, and it was he who had secured Miss Orne's private diary from the fellow who had stolen it from the madhouse wherein he had once been himself confined. The fellow was still slightly mad, and Samuel feared that this fellow might destroy the diary because of the bad dreams it seemed to instill within his prosaic skull. Samuel, having inherited a fortune from his wealthy Jewish sire, had easily procured the secret diary for an exchange of golden coins. There was no indication in Miss Orne's chronicle as to how she had discovered the existence of the forgotten burying-ground, although there is a mention in her journal about the dreams that caused her to don a dress of yellow silk and a death's-head mask and dance in a local cemetery where, exhausted, she would fall onto the ground and dine upon its dirt. It was such behaviour that convinced her relations to enshrine her at the asylum. Strangely, the freak who sold Samuel the diary was also fond of dressing in a yellow frock and wearing a pallid mask, and it was he who suggested that he too knew the whereabouts of the secret mound and its sarcophagus that had been mentioned in Sonia Orne's diary. Indeed, after one sexual incident, this fellow lunatic had drawn a map indicating how to find the forgotten burying-ground, and its mound, on which a spectral woman was said to dance by light of moon. We journeyed to the edge of Arkham in Morris's old jalopy, down a narrow road that became more and more treacherous, until we reached the place where the road had been split as if by some subterranean upheaval. Thus Mo parked his car, and we packed our gear and walked until we reached the spectral hollow, entering into it as the heavens turned a curious shade of hazy blue-violet. We trekked until we found, at last, the lonesome place, where we could feel its incredible ancientness in our mortal bones. The mound was half hidden by a thick growth of willows, but the fading light was enough to reveal the queer catacomb that had been built into it, the stone of which might once have been white, but was nigh black with hoary age. Diseased black growths of grass and vines dangled over the edge of the roof, and mingled with thick webs. 3 stone steps, 3 inches in height, led to an iron gate, and it took all 3 of us to coax the thing to swing on its protesting hinges. The vault's cramped chamber was chillier than the air outside, and I lit my antique lantern so as to lighten darkness and thus investigate the single granite coffin that lacked lid or occupant. What was that draught of cool air that breathed upon my ankles? Hunkering beside the crypt, I found the crevice through which a chilly zephyr issued. "Fellows," I spoke as I stood, "your assistance, please." They gazed at me uncomprehendingly as I indicated the oblong cyst and, leaning against it, began to push one end of it with sturdy hands. Still puzzled, my companions came to my aid, and we struggled until the coffin began to slide over the floor's smooth stone. And Samuel let out a yell when he came close to tumbling into the pit that we exposed. I wrinkled my nostrils and coughed. "That is the effluvium of the very pit. No, Morris, don't shine your modern flashlight's beam into the depths, for my antique lantern's glow is far more apropos in aiding our descent. Use caution as we traverse those cracked and narrow steps. They were not designed for feet like ours." I held my beacon high as the others slipped their torches into their packs, and I smiled as Samuel removed Sonia Orne's diary from a pocket, and held it as if it were some treasured talisman. Entering the aperture, and setting one unsteady hand against a cold and clammy wall, I began my descent into the labyrinth. "I feel like we've entered one of your wild stories," Morris told me, and he tried to laugh, although the noise was not convincing. "Or one of my dreams," I responded as I peered into the pit. It was unnerving, I confess, that the journey into the abyss took so long a time, took us so deeply down into the under-earth, and seemed to warp time itself. The wretched airstream continued to hurl its fetor into our faces. When at last we did reach ground level, I shouted at the cavernous space encountered, and the litter of yellow bones therein. Numerous dimly discernible archways led in a plethora of directions. "This is a dream indeed," I whispered. "A veritable phantasm." I moved toward one earthy archway, stepping over bones as we traversed damp sod, earth that was at times so soft that I feared it would sift beneath our tread, and open, so as to drag us down to deeper nightmare. The draught of nefarious effluvium had somewhat dissipated, but its nastiness clung to our clothes and hair, so that we resembled an assembly of shuffling cadavers who followed a deathlight to some obscure destination. And then we entered another open space, and we shouted in amazement at the sight before us, for it was nothing less than what remained of a decrepit building of disintegrating wood. The silence was absolute as I approached the narrow tiled plank that was all that remained of a door, and I spat disgust as the wood crumbled at my touch. "You're not seriously going inside, Howard," Morris protested. "The place will crumble on top of you, just like a house of Usher. The floor will split beneath your foot." "Pah! I've never seen anything so dirty and diseased. It's a veritable carcass. What have we stumbled on? Some forsaken town in which something so vile occurred that it was necessary to build new ground over it and hide it from sane sunlight. A place of buried transgression, a madness out of time." Samuel's voice sang to us. "It is a burial of time, where tomorrow will never come," Morris cried as the young Hebrew pushed past me and entered the edifice. I did not hesitate to follow him into what appeared to be a kind of parlour, where the few furnishings were crumbling, grime-coated antiques such as I had never encountered. In the dim place beyond were 3 narrow hallways, into one of which my youthful friend had trod. Sighing, I advanced after him, as he passed a number of rooms, each of which contained a bed. I was annoyed by the sound of Mo's rough laughter and his hand on my back. "It's a bordello!" "So it appears," I quietly concurred, watching as Samuel reached the end of the hallway and pushed open the final door. He vanished into the adjoining room, from which a pale illumination gradually filtered. He had turned on his flashlight. Morris rushed past me and entered the room, but I was hesitant, for I sensed that whatever the room held would be an eerie key to the mystery upon which we had been guided by the diary of a dead woman. But at last I gathered nerve and crept toward the room, where my fellows were shining their torches onto a small bed and its occupant. I surveyed the petite mummy that was attired in a tattered gown of yellow silk. A wig of deepest crimson covered its dome, and its eyelids were weighed shut with tarnished coins. I frowned at the soft sound of Samuel's lamentation, which I could not comprehend, and said nothing as he switched off his flashlight and floated to my side. Raising the Orne diary to my lantern's firelight, he turned its leaves until coming upon a poem that had been scribbled in faint script. He touched the page with caressing fingers as he recited: "I amble to your dark and quiet room, and kneel before your bed of final rest. I wear a splash of your preferred perfume, as in your yellow party frock I'm dressed. I see my shadow pirouette, and lift my silhouetted arms to hidden skies. O take, beloved's final precious gift. I kiss the pennies pressed upon your eyes. I clutch your glossy tresses with one hand, and move into the demon dance you taught. I listen for one final hushed command. I twist your wig into a tighter knot. I bend to press unholy lips to thine. My last embrace will be your ever shrine. My lamplight caught movement, as Morris glided to a small table and picked up the quaint object found thereon, an antique music box composed of white gold. How loud it clicked as he wound it, and how impossible it seemed that the relic began to play a delicate melody. I watched, as Samuel handed me the Orne diary, and shuddered as he pressed his lips to mine for one sweet kiss. Moving from me, he reached for the dead thing's crimson wig, and slipped the filthy thing over his hair. Lifting his graceful arms, he moved in time to the sound of the music box. How queer his silhouette moved across the walls, and how the entire room trembled at his tread. The melody from the box subsided, yet there was music still, muted and distant. Samuel spun toward one wall, to where there should have been a window, but was instead a rectangle sealed with solid stone. I quaked at the sight of it, for it suddenly reminded me of a nightmare that had recently disturbed my sleep. A vision of a house of death, wherein a window was sealed with such a block of stone. And this evocation of unearthly melody became hauntingly familiar the more I listened to it, and I knew that it was a noise that would herald doom. "No," I whispered, as my fellows touched the sealed window, and struggled so as to push the stone away. At last it moved and fell over the edge to the other side, and we all choked at the stench that wafted to us from the aperture. The noise was now distinct, the hideous piping that mocked the music box's enchanting tune. The space beyond the window's rim was illuminated with black-violet phosphorescence. We could just make out the alien tree that spread its writhing limbs, boughs on which 7 buzzing spheres shimmered with unnatural radiance. Below the sentient branches of the unfamiliar dendroid stood a black figure, gaunt and lean and haughty, its outline fluctuating as if it were enshrouded in a robe composed of midnight. I could not make out any facial features, except the octagonal eyes that shimmered as would golden coins. The uncanny composition commanded my attention, and my eyes tried to focus on the shifting things that squatted on the ground before the eidolon, and pressed cracked flutes to amorphous mouths. Now and then weird streams of diminutive lightning would spark among the 7 spheres of the alien tree, flashes that revealed a vortex of nothing beyond the demon and its tree, a hungry opacity. "No," I wept, as Samuel lifted himself into the window and crawled through its cavity, falling out of sight for one moment. When he rose, the wig no longer covered his glossy hair. I watched him drift toward the demon and stand trembling before it, and then he lowered to his knees as the creature offered Samuel its hand, which my friend began to lick. I shook into full wakefulness as Morris began to move into the window space. Turning, I fled from the room, out of the crumbling house, through the earthen labyrinth, until I found the narrow steps that took me into moonlight and fresh air. My friends were never seen again. I miss them. And yet there are times when I seem to sense their presence, and the other ghosts with whom they keep company. I sink into an awareness of this especially when I dream, when Samuel's lithe silhouette spins before me and presses his phantom mouth to my cool lips. I feel the air chill over me as they bend above my sleeping frame of flesh, and I do not protest when they place their coins upon my eyes.